The readings at daily Mass for the past 3 days were from Ecclesiastes, and they reminded us of the passing nature of life, that all things come to an end. And for as much importance we place on things here and now, after we die, those things don't really matter. I thought it was a fitting lead-up to today's gospel. In Catholic tradition, there are the so-called 4 last things: death and judgment, heaven and hell. And while it's good to think about these realities from time to time, we know that if we do, we're going to end up talking about sin. In my homilies, I don't generally say too much about sin, but today's gospel calls for it. And not just because of how awful it is, but the extent to which we should avoid it. Jesus used metaphors to make this point. If your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. Or your eye to sin, pluck it out. Very graphic images to emphasize the extent to which we are to separate ourselves from sin and to resist temptation. For a preacher, there's always a risk when talking about sin to come across or be seen as judgmental, condescending, and believe me, such could not be further from my intention. So I want to just simply share some of the teachings and comments and see what you might think of them. So the Catechism teaches us sin is an offense against reason, truth, and right conscience. It is failure in genuine love for God and neighbor, caused by a perverse attachment to certain goods. You may want to focus on the word attachment in that definition, a word that connotes a part of us, and maybe even something that takes some effort to remove or become detached from. And so a good question to ask ourselves is or are there certain things in our life to which we are perversely attached? Habits or thoughts or convictions to which we've become so accustomed that we hardly pay attention to their moral status? Have we settled into established ways of doing things or of behaviors that, while we've heard are immoral, we disagree with or simply ignore? I can tell you for sure that it's applied to me. Chesterton once insightfully remarked that we don't differ much about what things we call evil, but we differ enormously about what evils we call excusable. Another point about this gospel passage is that it conveys just how seriously Jesus takes sin and reminds us of the reality of existing eternally apart from God, what we might call hell. Now, it seems common today that many find it literally unbelievable that a place or a condition like hell could exist. The rationalization for that goes something like, how could an all-good God possibly send someone to hell? Of course, the implied answer is, he can't. But this line of reasoning is a contradiction, itself impossible. One of the temptations we must resist is thinking that there is no hell, that there is no possibility of eternal separation from God. Hell, or the state of eternal separation from God after we die, though, is not punishment from God, but in a sense something we seemingly and unknowingly choose. Though we might say, I would never choose to be separated from God, and that's true. Yet, that's precisely what happens in committing mortal sin. Famous C.S. Lewis in The Great Divorce expressed this choosing in this way. He said, there are only two kinds of people in the end. Those who say to God, thy will be done. And those to whom God says in the end, thy will be done. He goes on, all that are in hell choose it. Without that self-choice, there could be no hell. Friends, as we ponder these realities, let's continue to pray. Pray to always be close, humbly before God, asking for strength and courage to resist temptations and to pray that His will be done, and that when we are no longer alive on this earth, we may enjoy eternal peace and blessedness in communion with Him.